Marilyn, Lena, Ethan, and Ridgeview itself, each held secrets that would collide in a deadly storm, where trust shattered, love twisted, and one fatal choice would change their lives forever. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Ridgeview, Ohio, was the kind of place where time moved slowly, and almost nothing changed. Neighbors still waved at each other from their porches. The same single traffic light blinked red through quiet nights, and people trusted that bad things happened somewhere far away, never in their own streets. In this peaceful setting lived Marilyn Carter, a woman known for her calm presence and quiet strength. At 45, she worked at the town library, spent evenings tending to her small garden, and carried herself with the grace of someone who had learned to survive disappointment without letting the world see it. What no one knew was that Marilyn also carried a secret from her past, heavy and buried deep, a secret she believed would never surface again. Years earlier, before her daughter was born, Marilyn had fallen into a complicated relationship with a man named Ethan Ward. He had arrived in Ridgeview for a construction job, a handsome stranger with an easy smile and a way of making attention feel like affection. Back then, Marilyn was vulnerable, dealing with heartbreak and trying to rebuild her life. Ethan saw that softness and slipped into it. Their relationship had been passionate, messy, and short-lived, something Marilyn regretted, but tried to learn from. When Ethan eventually grew bored and left without explanation, she had been relieved and hurt at the same time. To protect herself and her future, she told no one. She locked the memory away like something dangerous. When her daughter Lena was born years later, Marilyn promised herself that she would give her a stable, honest life. She never wanted Lena to know how reckless her own past had once been. She raised her with care, shielding her from the mistakes that still echoed in her memory. Lena grew into a bright, curious girl with ambitions that stretched far beyond Ridgeview's quiet borders. After finishing college, she returned home, unsure about her next steps but comforted by the familiarity of her childhood town. Marilyn was grateful to have her daughter close again, hoping this new chapter would be peaceful for both of them. But Ridgeview had its own way of stirring the past, without warning. Marilyn began noticing small things that unsettled her. A truck that looked familiar, a glimpse of a face she hoped she'd never see again, a feeling of being watched whenever she walked home from work in the early evenings. At first she convinced herself it was nothing more than imagination. Small towns often played tricks on the mind, because they were too quiet, too predictable. Yet the unease wouldn't fade. Marilyn tried to focus on her daughter's return, and on rebuilding a close bond with her. She hoped that Lena's presence would quiet the shadows of her past. But deep inside, Marilyn sensed that life had begun shifting, like the slow movement of storm clouds gathering far over the horizon. She didn't know when the storm would break or how destructive it would be, only that something she thought was long gone was drifting back toward her life, something connected to the man she had hoped never to see again. Lena's return to Ridgeview came with the need to find something to do while she figured out her future. So she took a part-time job at a small cafe near the town square. The place was quiet most mornings, serving regulars who ordered the same coffee every day and lingered over local newspapers. Lena liked the calm rhythm of the cafe. It gave her time to think, to settle back into the life she had left behind. She never imagined that this ordinary routine would lead her directly into the center of a hidden past she didn't know existed. One chilly morning, while she was wiping down tables, the door opened and a man walked in wearing a worn jacket and carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had traveled through many places, but felt comfortable in all of them. He introduced himself to the staff as Ethan Ward, the contractor hired to remodel a few old storefronts nearby. Lena took his order without thinking much of it, but she noticed he watched her with a subtle familiarity, as if he already knew who she was. She brushed it off as nothing more than curiosity from a newcomer. Ridgeview was small, and new faces always drew attention. Ethan began coming to the cafe almost every day. He always sat at the same table, always ordered the same drink, always stayed just long enough to exchange a few warm words with Lena before heading out to his construction site. The routine felt harmless. Lena found him easy to talk to, and he had a way of making her feel seen during a time when she felt lost and uncertain about her path. He complimented her work ethic, listened to her talk about her college experience, and offered small bits of advice about finding direction in life. Everything he said seemed genuine, and Lena began to look forward to his visits. What she didn't notice, however, was the careful way Ethan chose his words, or the way he subtly guided conversations so he could learn more about her personal life. He asked small questions about her family, pretending the curiosity was casual. When Lena mentioned her mother, Marilyn, he listened with keen interest, hiding the recognition that struck him immediately. He remembered Marilyn well, her quiet beauty, her vulnerability, the way she had clung to him years ago. He had not expected to meet her daughter, but now that he had, something inside him shifted into place like a puzzle piece he didn't know he had been missing. As the days passed, Ethan began planting himself deeper into Lena's routine. He offered rides home when it rained, brought small gifts like pastries from a nearby bakery, and shared stories that made him seem thoughtful and trustworthy. Lena, having grown up without many complicated relationships, didn't sense the imbalance forming between them. To her he was simply kind. To him, she was an opportunity, one that allowed him to step back into a life he believed owed him something. Marilyn had no idea any of this was unfolding, but Ethan had already recognized the Carter name from the moment he first saw Lena's name tag, and instead of pulling away, he stayed close, waiting for the right moment to step further into a past he had once walked away from, now determined to reclaim a place he believed he deserved. Marilyn first sensed something was wrong when she noticed her daughter spending more time outside the house and returning home with a distracted expression. Lena had always been open with her, eager to share new experiences or talk about the people she met, but now she offered only brief comments and vague explanations. Marilyn tried to dismiss her concerns, telling herself that Lena was simply adjusting to life after college. Young adults needed space and parents had to learn to let go. Still, there was something unsettling in the way Lena avoided eye contact whenever Marilyn asked about her day. One afternoon, Marilyn left work early and decided to stop by the cafe where Lena worked. She wanted to surprise her daughter and maybe have a small lunch together. As she approached the building, she saw Lena through the window, smiling in a way Marilyn hadn't seen in months. It wasn't the smile that worried her. It was the direction of that smile. Following her daughter's gaze, Marilyn saw a man sitting alone at a corner table. He looked older than Lena, confident, relaxed. When he turned his head slightly, the light caught his features, and Marilyn's breath froze in her chest. The face was one she hoped she would never see again. Ethan Ward. The memory struck her like a sharp blow. Years collapsed into a single moment, and suddenly she was standing in the past, remembering the thrill, the confusion, the heartbreak, the escape. She stepped back from the window, her heart pounding so loudly she thought someone might hear it. She didn't dare go inside. Instead, she walked quickly back to her car and drove home with trembling hands, replaying the image in her mind. Ethan was back in Ridgeview, and somehow, impossibly, he had found his way to Lena. That evening, Marilyn tried to act normal around her daughter, but her mind never stopped racing. She wondered whether Ethan recognized her last name. She wondered if he intended to approach her again, or if this was all some cruel coincidence. When Lena mentioned her day at work, Marilyn listened closely, hoping to hear even a hint of the truth. But Lena spoke casually, only mentioning that the cafe had been busy and that she was tired. No mention of Ethan. No mention of a stranger who seemed to draw her interest. As days passed, Marilyn's fear grew stronger. She saw small changes in Lena that confirmed her suspicions. Lena was more secretive with her phone, more protective of her privacy. She dressed differently, more carefully, as if wanting to impress someone. Marilyn recognized the signs because she had lived them once. Ethan had a way of making a woman feel chosen, seen, and special, until the moment he grew bored or wanted control. Marilyn stayed awake at night, imagining how to approach the subject without pushing Lena further away. She knew her daughter, and she knew that any hint of accusation would only create distance. But doing nothing felt dangerous. She wanted to protect Lena from a man she knew was capable of emotional manipulation. The shadow of her past had returned, and Marilyn felt the first unsettling realization that she could no longer outrun what she had tried so hard to bury. Ethan had re-entered her world through the one person she loved more than anything, and Marilyn sensed that the calm life she had built was beginning to crack, one silent fracture at a time. The slow shift in Lena's personality became impossible for Marilyn to ignore. The change wasn't loud or dramatic. It crept in quietly, settling into the corners of their home like an unwelcome guest. Lena spent more time out, often claiming she had extra shifts or needed to meet coworkers, but she never seemed tired from work or dressed for casual errands. She moved with a sense of purpose that didn't match her vague explanations. Marilyn watched all of this with a growing ache in her chest, knowing exactly what it meant, even though she wished she was wrong. Ethan's presence lingered in Marilyn's thoughts, day and night. She feared he was slowly tightening his influence over her daughter the same way he once had over her, through charm, attention, and a carefully crafted sense of connection. Marilyn remembered how he made her feel chosen, as if she were important in ways she didn't understand until it was too late. And now Lena, young and uncertain about her path, was walking directly into the same trap. Lena, on the other hand, felt invigorated by Ethan's attention. She didn't see the warning signs her mother recognized so clearly. She believed Ethan understood her frustrations better than anyone else. He listened when she talked about feeling lost after college, about struggling to stand on her own, about wanting something exciting to break the quiet routine of Ridgeview. Ethan knew exactly how to respond, offering comfort in ways that made Lena feel valued. He sprinkled compliments with precision, not too heavy, but enough to keep her close. His confidence and maturity made him seem wise rather than manipulative, and Lena trusted him with the innocence of someone who had yet to experience real danger. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to study Lena the way someone examines a tool they intend to use. He learned her habits, her fears, her insecurities. He subtly encouraged her to pull away from Marilyn by suggesting that she needed independence, that her mother might be holding her back without realizing it. Lena absorbed these ideas slowly, allowing them to shape her thought. She didn't openly challenge Marilyn, but the closeness between them thinned, replaced by unspoken tension and quick disagreement. Marilyn sensed the pull immediately. Their once warm conversations now felt forced, and Lena responded to simple questions with impatience. Marilyn tried to stay calm, hoping that she could find the right moment to talk openly, but every attempt ended with Lena shutting down or walking away. Marilyn knew she was losing her daughter to someone who had returned to their lives for reasons she couldn't yet understand. The turning point came when Marilyn saw a message flash on Lena's unlocked phone one evening. It wasn't the words that frightened her. It was the sender. Ethan's name appeared casually, like he belonged there. Marilyn didn't read the full message, but she didn't need to. The truth stood in front of her, undeniable and painful. Lena wasn't just involved with Ethan, she trusted him deeply. In that moment, Marilyn realized that silence was no longer an option. Ethan had inserted himself into Lena's life with alarming precision, and if Marilyn didn't act soon, the situation would spiral into something far worse than emotional manipulation. She felt the gravity of the past pulling her forward, demanding that she confront the very thing she had spent years trying to forget. Marilyn knew she could no longer stay silent. The tension in the house had grown so heavy that even simple conversations felt strained. Every time she tried to bring up Lena's behavior, her daughter shut down or left the room. Marilyn felt trapped between fear and responsibility, knowing that avoiding conflict might allow Ethan to pull Lena even further away. After days of sleepless nights and racing thoughts, she decided it was time to confront the man who had once turned her life upside down and who was now doing the same to her daughter. She planned carefully, waiting for a moment when Lena wouldn't be around. One afternoon, Marilyn left work early once again and walked to the back of the cafe, knowing Ethan often took breaks in the alley behind the building. She hoped to talk to him privately, away from the eyes of neighbors or her daughter. When she reached the narrow walkway behind the cafe, she saw him leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone. The sight of him made her stomach twist with a mixture of fear and anger. Ethan looked up, and immediately recognized her. Though he hid it well, there was a momentary flicker of surprise, followed by a calm, almost smug expression that reminded her exactly who he had always been. Marilyn felt her pulse race, but forced herself to stay composed. She wanted answers. Why he was back, what he wanted, and why he had involved himself with Lena. She demanded that he stay away from her daughter, insisting that whatever had happened between them years ago was reason enough for him to keep his distance. Ethan listened with unsettling calmness, as though he had expected her to come. He reminded her that he hadn't done anything wrong, that Lena was an adult capable of making her own decisions. He used his calm tone like a weapon, making Marilyn feel irrational for worrying. He hinted that maybe she should tell Lena the truth about their past, if she was so concerned. The way he said it made Marilyn realize he had anticipated this moment and had already prepared for it. Ethan enjoyed watching her struggle, and that frightened her more than his presence alone. Marilyn walked away shaken, feeling as if she had just lost a battle she didn't even understand. She feared that telling Lena about the affair would destroy their relationship, but keeping it hidden allowed Ethan to twist the story however he wanted. She didn't know which direction was safer. Every choice felt like a trap. Meanwhile, Lena grew even closer to Ethan, without realizing the chaos building around her. She believed his portrayal of Marilyn as controlling and overly protective. He suggested that Marilyn's concerns came from her inability to accept that Lena was an adult now. These ideas took root in Lena's thoughts, creating a distance that Marilyn could feel but couldn't bridge. The feeling of danger grew heavier each day. Marilyn sensed that Ethan's return was not a coincidence, and his interest in Lena was not harmless. She felt a sinking dread, as though events were moving towards something irreversible. With both fear and desperation growing inside her, Marilyn knew the time for gentle warnings had passed. She needed a new plan because Ethan was not going to walk away, and Lena was already too deep into his influence to see the truth on her own. The night the storm rolled into Ridgeview, the air felt heavy in a way that made everything seem sharper and more fragile. Thick clouds gathered above the town, swallowing the moonlight and casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhoods. Marilyn sensed something was wrong long before anything actually happened. It was a feeling she couldn't explain, an instinct that told her something was about to break. She had spent the day on edge, unable to shake the thought that Ethan was becoming more dangerous. Every attempt to reach Lena had failed, and Marilyn feared she was running out of time to protect her daughter from the growing hold he had over her. Lena had been unusually quiet all day, avoiding conversation and disappearing into her room the moment she came home from work. Marilyn hoped she could talk to her once the storm calmed, but Lena left the house without warning just as the rain began to fall, claiming she needed some fresh air. Marilyn knew exactly where she was going. Her heart pounded with worry, but she stayed inside, torn between following her daughter and giving her space. She tried to convince herself that maybe Lena would return with a clearer mind, but the storm outside matched the turmoil inside her chest. Hours later, Marilyn heard voices outside, raised emotional voices struggling to be heard over the thunder. She moved to the window and saw Lena standing near the front steps, soaked from the rain, arguing with someone who was just out of sight. Marilyn's breath caught when she recognized Ethan's silhouette moving closer. The sight of the two of them together in the storm felt like a nightmare come to life. Marilyn rushed out of the house, shouting Lena's name, but the wind carried her voice in every direction. As she approached, she could see the distress on her daughter's face. Lena had discovered something. Marilyn could see it in her eyes. Perhaps Ethan had revealed part of the truth, twisted to make Marilyn look like the villain. The hurt in Lena's expression cut deeper than the rain soaking through Marilyn's clothes. She reached out, trying to explain everything, but Lena's emotions were spiraling too fast. Confusion, betrayal, anger, all mixed together in a dangerous storm of their own. Ethan stepped closer, pretending to calm the situation while secretly fueling it. He accused Marilyn of keeping secrets, of lying, of trying to control Lena's future. His words struck Lena at her most vulnerable moment, and Marilyn knew he was manipulating the moment with precision. She tried desperately to confess the truth, to explain what had happened years ago, but Lena felt overwhelmed and cornered. Her emotions blurred every sound around her. She could barely think, let alone listen. In a split second of panic, Lena pushed Marilyn away, wanting distance, wanting the storm around her to stop. Marilyn stumbled backward onto the slippery stone steps. The moment her head struck the edge, everything fell silent. The rain poured harder, drowning out Ethan's sudden shift from calm manipulator to frantic schemer. Lena froze in shock, her body shaking as she stared at her motionless mother. Ethan was the first to move, but not to help. Instead, he seized control, telling Lena what they needed to do, convincing her that no one would believe the truth. The storm raged on as he shaped the narrative, turning panic into compliance, and pulling Lena deeper into a tragedy she never meant to cause. Ethan reacted with unsettling speed, his mind already calculating the next steps while Lena remained frozen beside her mother's still body. The storm raged against them, pounding the ground with sheets of rain, but Ethan's voice cut through the noise with sharp clarity. He insisted that they had no time to grieve, no time to think. He told Lena that panic would ruin everything, that her life would be over if anyone discovered what had happened. His tone carried a frightening certainty, and Lena, overwhelmed by shock and guilt, clung to his words as if they were the only thing keeping her from drowning. Lena stumbled backward, her legs shaking as she stared at Marilyn, unable to accept what she had done. She tried to reach for her mother, to check for a pulse, but Ethan grabbed her wrist and pulled her away. He told her not to touch anything, not to leave evidence, not to make a single mistake. His urgency felt like guidance to her fractured mind, and Lena followed him blindly, unable to think for herself. Every part of her felt numb except for the crushing weight in her chest. Ethan dragged her back toward the house, telling her they needed to stage the scene to look like an accident. He spoke with a disturbing calmness, as if he had rehearsed this scenario in his mind long before it happened. He explained how they would claim Marilyn slipped on the wet steps during the storm. He described the details where they needed to stand, what they needed to say, how she should look distraught but not guilty. Lena's hands shook as she followed instructions, her breathing unsteady, her thoughts trapped in a loop of disbelief. Inside the house, Ethan wiped surfaces they had touched on their way out. He forced Lena to change out of her wet clothes and place them in a bag he planned to dispose of later. Each action made Lena feel more like a stranger in her own home, as if she were watching someone else live her life. Her mind replayed the moment of the fall again and again, each repetition sharper and more painful. She wanted to scream, to run, to reverse time, but Ethan kept her anchored in a nightmare she couldn't escape. While they worked, neighbors quietly observed from behind curtains. The storm had brought people to their windows, and the raised voices earlier hadn't gone unnoticed. A few had heard parts of the argument before the thunder swallowed the rest. Others had seen the figures moving outside, and though no one stepped in that night, they remembered enough to speak about it later. When the authorities arrived, summoned by a shaky call from Ethan pretending to be concerned, they immediately sensed something was off. The inconsistencies began to appear within minutes. The injuries didn't match the supposed fall. The placement of Marilyn's body seemed unnatural. Ethan's rehearsed explanation felt too polished, and Lena's trembling words didn't align with his confidence. Officers noticed her swollen eyes, the way she avoided looking at Ethan, the guilt etched into her expression. Back at the station, the weight of the truth pressed down harder. Investigators questioned them separately, and Ethan maintained his calm facade, weaving a story meant to absolve them both. But Lena couldn't hold her emotions together. Her breaths came in gasps, her hands shook uncontrollably, and every question chipped away at the fragile wall Ethan had built around her. The cracks were widening, and for the first time since the fatal moment on the steps, Lena began to realize that Ethan wasn't trying to protect her. He was trying to protect himself. Lena sat in the interrogation room with her hands clasped tightly together, her knuckles pale and trembling. The hours since the incident had stretched endlessly, blurring into each other, until she could no longer tell how much time had passed. The small room felt suffocating, every tick of the wall clock reminding her that the truth was slowly pressing its way to the surface. The weight of what she had done, what she had allowed, was unbearable. Her thoughts raced through every moment of the night, each memory sharper and more unbearable than the last. Across the hall, Ethan sat in another room, calm and composed, as though he were simply discussing an inconvenient misunderstanding rather than a woman's death. Investigators had already noticed the inconsistencies between their stories. Ethan's detailed explanation seemed almost rehearsed, while Lena's hesitation and emotional collapse pointed to a much more complicated truth. Officers had spoken to neighbors who heard shouting before the fall, and others who saw silhouettes moving suspiciously during the storm. Every account added fractures to Ethan's narrative, and Lena's body language revealed that she was balancing on the edge of a confession. The lead detective, recognizing her fragile state, spoke gently, asking Lena to walk through the events again. With each question, the wall she tried to maintain weakened. It wasn't just guilt pushing her toward the truth, it was the realization that Ethan had never protected her. He had been controlling her since the beginning, twisting her emotions for his own gain. In the quiet moments of the interrogation, she began to see how much he had manipulated her from the first day they met. She remembered the subtle suggestions, the careful praise, the strategic sympathy, and how he had turned her against her mother without her even noticing. The final push came when the detective mentioned Marilyn by name, referring to her as Lena's mother, not a victim, not a body, but a mother. The word broke something inside her. Tears spilled freely, and for the first time since the incident, she allowed herself to feel the full grief of losing the person who had loved her unconditionally. The detective waited patiently as Lena caught her breath, and then she finally spoke. Her confession poured out in a series of disjointed, emotional sentences, unraveling the web Ethan had constructed. She admitted to the argument, to the push, to the fall, to the panic. She explained Ethan's involvement, his manipulation, and his immediate attempt to control the narrative. With each word, the truth grew clearer, and Ethan's careful facade crumbled. When investigators confronted him with Lena's confession, he shifted from calm to defensive, stumbling over explanations and redirecting blame. Without Lena's cooperation, his entire plan fell apart. The case quickly turned against him. Ethan was charged with coercion, evidence tampering, and contributing to the circumstances that led to Marilyn's death. Lena faced charges as well, though investigators acknowledged that she had been under the heavy influence of an older, manipulative man who had shaped her actions at a vulnerable time in her life. Her future would be shaped by courts and evaluations, but she no longer carried the burden of silence. Ridgeview was shaken by the tragedy. A quiet town unaccustomed to violent crime found itself discussing the case for months. Neighbors who once saw Lena as the friendly girl from the cafe now watched with a mix of sympathy and sorrow. Marilyn's memory lingered heavily in the community, a reminder of how secrets can breed danger when left hidden too long. In the end, Lena expressed only one regret: that she had let a stranger's influence overshadow her mother's love. The truth had cost her everything, but it was the only thing that allowed Marilyn's story to be heard. And though justice did not erase the tragedy, it brought an end to the chain of manipulation that began long before Lena ever knew Ethan's name.